Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It's Thursday, January 23rd, 2025 at 10:10 in the morning. We've just come back from a short break. And now we'll have an introduction to the Department of Labor. So I scheduled this for a couple of hours discussion. We have Commissioner Harrington with us and other members of Department of Labor. So Commissioner, thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time. One of our core partners, actually when we're talking about employment and workforce. So before we get started, I'll just ask committee, we'll go around, introduce themselves to you so you can put face to the names. Don?
Jonathan Cooper, Bennington 1, Southwestern Vermont includes Pownell, Woodford, Searsburg, Stanford, and Reedsboro.
Great.
There's Duncan representing the Deerfield Valley, Wilmington, Whitingham, Halifax.
Great, thank you.
Abby Duke from part of Burlington.
Hi, Edie Granning, Jericho and Underhill, and the Vice Chair of the committee.
Mike Markov from Coventry, representing Coventry, Irisburg, Newport Town, Troy J. Westfield, Lowell and Eden, and Chair of the committee.
I'm Kirk White, represent Bethel, Rochester, Stockbridge, and Hancock, and I'm the ranking member.
Monique Priestley, Redford, Fairleigh, Westerly.
Tony Miklas, representing most of Milton and a little bit of Georgia.
Okay,
Dave Bosch, Wallingford, Clarendon, West Rutland, and the bulk of Rutland Town.
Terrific. Good. For the record, my name is Michael Harrington. I'm the commissioner for the Department of Labor. Started with the department in 2017 as the deputy commissioner, became interim commissioner in September of 2019, and then was appointed to the commissioner role in June of 2020. Originally from Bennington, Vermont. Prior to coming to work for the state, I worked for the town of Bennington as their economic and community development director. And before that, my mother had an international management consulting business in North Bennington, Vermont. And I worked with her for a few years as well. And so that was a true privilege. She has since passed, but her business was around for more than 30 years. And she worked across the state. So that was a great experience for me. In the room with me today, I've got our Deputy Commissioner, Kendall Smith, who's new to the Department of Labor, but not new to state government or the work that we do. Next to her is Jay Ramsey, our Workforce Development Division Director. And next to him is the new Executive Director of the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development, Sabina Haskell. Many of you may know Sabina in her previous role with the NRB. And then to my left is Rowan Hawthorne, who's the Principal Assistant and Legislative Liaison for the department. And next to her is Dirk Anderson, who is our Director of the Workers' Compensation and Safety Division. We're going to run through the department. You'll get to know probably many more people from the labor team, but I believe they were specifically here because you may have questions about their programs. And probably some others, so we can talk about those as well. We have, for the new members, a long-standing relationship with, positive relationship with this committee. You are probably our primary or one of the primary policy committees that we come before on a regular basis regarding all things labor. And so I will just say that in the past 8 years of being with the state, it's been a true pleasure working with this committee. We don't always agree on all the policy items, but I think we work really well together. And I think the committee members that have been here a while know that you can reach out to me or any of us at any time, and we're happy to take your call and deal with whatever issue, question, concern, or just general information you have. So again, I extend that to all of you. You're welcome to reach out to me directly or any of us in this room, and we're happy to help wherever we can. We do have a PowerPoint, so we can run through that. I think a lot of you have that. Rowan is going to share her screen and run through the PowerPoint. You good? So on the next slide, You'll see a picture of the Department of Labor. For those who don't know, our main office is just down the street as if you were heading towards National Life or to the highway. We're off on the right-hand side, just past the high school. It's a building that was built in 1960 by the federal government. And so two of our core programs, unemployment insurance and workforce development, are mostly federally funded. And back in the 60s, the federal government went around to all the states and built different labor offices. This is one of them to house workforce and unemployment insurance. It also houses our other programs as well. So this is our central office, and then we operate 11 regional offices, one satellite office. The other property that we actually own is in Burlington and on Pearl Street, and just past the bus station. So within walking distance of Church Street, that traditionally and not surprisingly is our largest regional office, and we'll get into those as we go through these. But over the past couple of years, the department and the staff developed both our purpose for the department as well as our principles. And so we thought we'd share that with you as well. But the Department of Labor exists to improve the lives of working Vermonters. Together, we serve the people and businesses of our great state so all of us can live well, be safe, and experience meaningful employment. And then on the next slide, we articulate what our four principles are within the department. Working with an operational excellence mindset, providing compassionate service to everyone, acting with professionalism and integrity in all that we do, and ensuring equity, access, and belonging for our staff and our customers. So that's what we strive to do each and every day. We don't always hit 100%, but that is the goal and the focus for our team there. And it's through those principles that we believe we can achieve our purpose. We can get into kind of the overview of the Department of Labor. So on the next slide, you'll see a high-level organizational chart, starting with the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, but then going down to our division directors or unit directors. So on the left of your screen, we've got our Workforce Development Division, which is Jay Ramsey, as I mentioned. Our Economic and Labor Market Information Division. So many of you either have heard from Matt or know Matt Barowitz. He's our chief economist. He also runs our Economic and Labor Market Information Division. His program is predominantly, if not 99%, federally funded. The programs he administers are federally focused and regulated. They are a combination of the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics and the U.S. Census Bureau. And so his team essentially develops all the occupational and labor force data. And so the department puts out a monthly jobs report each month, and Matt's data and team are the ones who develop the jobs report amongst some other programs that they operate. We have our unemployment insurance division that I know has been top of mind for many of you and for a lot of the media for quite a while. We went through some challenges during the pandemic, and those challenges have continued to plague us since the pandemic. But the good news there is that we are working on the modernization of our system. So I'm assured you probably have some questions or comments or concerns, and happy to receive those today. We have our workers' comp and safety division. So on the workers' comp side, part of the role is really ensuring that Vermont businesses that have employees have workers' comp coverage. But it also means that we help work with employers, insurers, and injured workers to mediate their claims and come to a resolution on those claims. And then our safety division, which we'll talk more about, includes VOSHA, which is Vermont's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or you've probably heard of federal OSHA. So Vermont has a state program, which is Vermont's OSHA program. So they're focused on ensuring employee safety in the workforce, but their focus is only on employee safety. So not general safety, not safety to the public, but safety to employees and workers. The other program is Project WorkSafe, and they're a no-cost program to employers to come in and do safety audits so they know where to focus their energy and time, so they don't find themselves in a situation where a worker is injured and they're at fault. And then we also, probably not well known, actually inspect and oversee the construction of all of the chairlifts, the ski area chairlifts in the state. And that's our passenger tramway program. And that includes all conveyor systems. So chairlifts or ground conveyor systems. We inspect those annually. And then anytime there is new construction or modification, our team is there to ensure that they're built according to Vermont and the national standards. We also have a legal team. Robert Depper is our Chief General Counsel and oversees our legal team, which covers mainly appeals. So everything from workers' comp appeals to unemployment insurance appeals to wage and hour appeals and investigations fall under Robert's area, as well as, I would call it employee rights, although we do not administer all aspects of the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. So that is a partnership between us and the Attorney General's office, depending on what the issue is. We handle mainly wage and time complaints. So if an employee works and doesn't get paid, or Vermont's child labor laws fall under our wage and hour division, although ours mirror pretty much the federal standard. And then we also have our business office. Many of you will get to know, especially when we talk about budgets, Chad Wozniak, who's our CFO. And Chad oversees both the fiscal side, but also the business side of the house. That includes everything from operations, policies, procedures. We have a new member on our team within the past couple of years who's our equal opportunity and accessibility manager. We have a performance manager. We do a lot of projects and contracts and procurement come out of the business office as well. So the next slide, which I won't go through completely, just does a deeper dive for all of you on the programs that come out of each of our main functional areas. And you can see everything from, again, the 11 regional offices and the focus that we have on our workforce development, all the way over to the fact that our business office handles facilities, finance, contracts, operations, performance management, and equal opportunity and accessibility efforts, and then everything in between. So we're going to go through each of these. So I'm not going to go into a deep dive on all of those. So on the next slide, just an overview. This is what the Department of Labor looks like across the state in terms of our regional offices. For those of you who have been around a while, you may remember our job centers or workforce centers or career centers used to be called the unemployment offices. It's still treated by many as such. So we do get a lot of foot traffic who come into our regional offices for assistance in unemployment insurance. But the main focus of these buildings and these efforts under the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act are around jobs seeker services. So we will work with both job seekers who may be looking to simply just find their next job, or they may be looking for training and employment services. So everything from helping them build a resume, or going through mock interviews, or linking them into a training program because maybe they want to obtain their CDL driver's license, or they want to go back to school to go into a different career path. So we can help with all of those. areas. Our funding comes out of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, or WIOA. We can talk a little bit more about that. WIOA has been in the news recently at the federal level because Congress was hoping to be able to reauthorize that federal program, although it didn't cross the finish line. But we hear it may come back around, a couple different opportunities for it to come back to the forefront. In overall, it's good for us if it gets reauthorized. However, there are many federal programs out there that have never been reauthorized but continue to get funding. So not being reauthorized doesn't necessarily mean they don't get funded. But if it's authorized, then it's more of a guarantee that the funding exists there for the life of the reauthorization. So that's being monitored by our federal or our national association that we belong to, which is the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. I serve currently as the past chair of the board, served the past 18 months as chair. And prior to that was secretary for the board at the national level. So that group, and we'll make sure when they publish their policy papers, which we were heavily involved in, that you each get a copy of that. But you'll see that the issues that Vermont is dealing with are issues that every state is dealing with, and they are top of mind at the policy level at our national conversation. So we'll make sure you each get a copy of that. But again, this kind of gives you the rundown of where our offices are. The reason the Burlington office is highlighted, just as a note, is that we have to have what's called a federally certified one-stop American Job Center. There is no acronym for that, thank God. We just call it our federally certified job center. And so, for instance, and where Vermont is a little different than a majority of the other states is that we are considered a single state. So many larger states have a state workforce board, and that board oversees regional offices that have regional boards, or they're called local boards. Vermont is small enough that we have simply a state workforce board, and we're not broken into regions with local boards. But you could take like Massachusetts, for example, I think has something like 14 local boards. So the state has a state board, and then there are 14 regions. And in each of those regions, there are multiple offices, job centers, and there are local boards that operate the job centers and the services coming out of those regions. We here at the state operate and deliver our WIOA services as opposed to having the local boards do that work. I will tell you that we are the envy of every state that has multiple boards and multiple regions and multiple offices. And so there are like 5 or 6, I think, states that are considered single states based on their size. And so it is much easier for us to collaborate and coordinate given the current structure of our system. But that's why the Burlington office is highlighted.
A number of years ago, we used to have WIBs
Yes.
and the workforce investment boards that were regional. Some were high functioning and others were non-functioning.
Yep, and that fell under probably part of it was state-led, part of it was probably funded under WIA, which was the Workforce Investment Act. It's the precursor to WIOA. I'll pause there just because I've been speaking for a minute and see if there are questions before we jump in.
Just, if you could just looking at BAA.
Yeah.
I know there's an $8 million revision.
Yep.
Reversion. DOL. If you could just let us know what that 8 million.
Yeah.
I think I know what it was. I think it was the original 8 million for the build out of the.
It was not actually. So glad you brought up the question. As the chair may know, remember 2 or 3 years ago, we were successful in adding an additional $5 million to the base funding for unemployment insurance. And so 2 million of that was for enhanced operations and administration, and 3 million of that was what we called modernization, but it's the cost to the business for modernization. So we have to staff up modernization, equipment, space, all those things that aren't part of the actual contract with the vendor. And so we received that in our base funding. We didn't spend everything out of the administration line because we were still using ARPA dollars. And so we were burning down ARPA dollars for administration because those had an expiration date on them as opposed to general fund dollars. And then on the modernization, that 3 million, we didn't use all of those either because we hadn't started the modernization project yet. So what you see in the carry forward was simply money that we were either using federal dollars first, or we hadn't started the modernization project yet. So the money still exists in our base budget. We have burned through all of our ARPA dollars, and they expired at the end of this year anyways. And we have kicked off in the last year our modernization effort. So those dollars will be used in this current year and going forward. But the 8 million is simply money that over the last 2 years was not used for those two reasons.
And you don't need, you don't need any of those dollars for the modernization.
There's currently no. I think you will find that, and my understanding is we'll do a true up here. And just so you know, it's an ADS project. So an Agency of Digital Services project. They will do a true up. I think we will probably come forward, probably not now, but in the next year, potentially needing some more funding. But I don't know that until they do their true up of their IT ABC form on what it's going to cost for us with this vendor. I don't expect it to be, double or anything like that. But I could see it increasing because when you conceptualize modernization, it's very different than when you actually get into modernization. The nice part is that, so when the original funding was appropriated, we didn't even have a contract yet with a vendor. And so, because you can't even go out to RFP or have a good faith negotiation unless you have the money secured for the project. For the most part, we were able to negotiate with this vendor slightly under the $30 million. But what that doesn't account for is like project management services, business architect services, and other services that come out of the Agency of Digital Services. So I think that's where the true up will be. But at this point, we were prepared to, again, if you were to say, like, could you use more money? We could always use more money. But, you'll hear this and, as you have over the past couple of days, this was an opportunity for us to help fund some of these major initiatives that are quintessential to Vermont's success, and that is education reform and housing advancement. So most of those funds were reverted back in order to help fund those programs. I'm sure we will come at different times, again, maybe not this year, but in the upcoming year with a different ask. I just don't know what it is, so it doesn't make sense to bring it forward now. So speaking of money, though, on the next slide, and just because I can't read it on my sheet, the left talks about our total funding, but broken down by where does it come from? And then on the right side is where does it go? And so most of our money is federally funded. I can tell you, and the chair probably knows that, can remember back to, if you were to look at this pie chart from 2017, it was like 85% federally funded. And that's not the case anymore. And so some of that has been investments in workforce. Other things have been investments in UI. So again, mostly federally funded. And then general fund and special fund. The special fund is primarily workers' comp. So our workers' compensation program is funded through a special fund, which is a tax percent on premiums that are issued in the state for workers' comp insurance. And then on the right, again, our biggest programs are workers' comp, and there are a couple of reasons why that is so much bigger than the others, because we don't often think of workers' comp as a large our two largest programs, but it did have a significant grant attached to it. And then unemployment insurance and workforce development, and then some others, labor market information and the state workforce board. So that gives you just an overview. The next, I'll pause there just to see if there are any questions, because sometimes funding is a topic area.
Probably get more into the funding when the budget comes out.
Great. Next slide, which I'll just touch on. When you think of the Department of Labor, there are four key areas, right? Workforce development, unemployment insurance, workers' comp and safety, and labor market information. Those are our four core divisions out of the department. Each one of these, and I'm not going to read them verbatim or hit on each program because we've got Jay in the room next. So he can certainly talk to workforce development. But again, the bulk of the funding that comes out of workforce development is through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That funds our staff, which deliver programs out of our adult program, our youth program, our dislocated worker or laid off worker program, and then a federal program called Wagner-Pfizer, which is considered our labor exchange services. So when somebody walks into one of our regional offices, they are serviced out of somebody who is funded through the Wagner-Pfizer program, and that is just general assistance, labor and workforce assistance. When they actually are deemed eligible for one of those federal programs, they are then serviced by a case manager working out of one of those programs. And you can see there are other ancillary programs like apprenticeships, which is predominantly state funded. Some federal funds go into apprenticeships depending on each year and their award, or our VETS program, or our migrant seasonal farm worker program. So there are other programs, but the core programs that we administer under WIOA are dislocated worker, adult, youth, and Wagner-Pfizer. And the interesting thing on the youth piece, which again is, it makes sense, I guess, from a policy perspective, but it is challenging for our team, is that a majority of the money that gets spent out of our youth program has to be spent on what they call out-of-school youth. So it's not students who are currently enrolled in education. And so obviously those that are out of school, maybe they've dropped out, maybe they got their GED, but they're not attending school on a regular basis. They're much harder to identify, find, and engage with. So that makes that program a little harder to administer. But again, we're able to potentially do a 50-50 on that. But out of the gate, they would prefer that more money gets spent on out-of-school youth than in-school youth. Jay, I'll pause there and say, is there anything that you want to add just on the overview of the division?
Touched on all the points. I could talk about how the allocation is made for WIOA, but I don't know if you want those weeds.
I think why don't we go through this and then see where the questions take us? I will say that the focus has been both for the department and the federal government on apprenticeship or work-based learning efforts. So things like internships, returnships, other work-based learning grants and funding opportunities, but mainly under the apprenticeship model. And there is a key piece there that I just want to highlight. So a lot of people use the term apprenticeship. But to be a registered apprentice means that you're working in a program with an employer that has a certified program through the Vermont Department of Labor and the federal government, which means that when you graduate from that program, your certificate can be used anywhere across the country. And so if you become certified as an electrician or a plumber, or in home construction, or any of the other multitude of programs that are registered apprenticeship programs through the states, you can go and use that credential anywhere in the country because it's a registered apprenticeship program, which is different than, again, just getting linked up with an employer and having them call you an apprentice. And that doesn't mean that what you're learning isn't valuable, but we highlight the registered apprenticeship piece because it does have more value for the participant.
So can you talk not only to this one, but to all of the different departments on the staffing, right? Sure. But specifically on this one, on the job center.
Yep.
When I was excitedly talking about our executive director of work, sharing that with folks, I got questions about not being able to get workforce support at job centers.
Yeah.
Curious how the staffing is going specifically there, but also throughout.
Yeah. So again, our staffing is, I think, driven twofold. One, it's how much money do we have to spend on staffing? The workforce development division looked very different 20 plus years ago. And our funding at the federal level is really driven by demand. And so we get more funding when there are higher unemployment rates and more people enrolled in programs. And so part of the biggest challenge for both workforce development and unemployment insurance right now is that unemployment rates are low and the number of people collecting unemployment is low and the number of people walking through our door is low because it's such a tight labor market. So, but from a staffing perspective, it fluctuates, and I know it says up here 64, but I think we're probably closer to maybe 75 or 80 if we were fully staffed. But we have a lot of frontline staff. So again, it's entry. Some of it is entry level work in workforce development. We also, again, according to the feds, and I think we agree, we operate a lot of physical locations for a state our size. And some of those locations are staffed by like 2 people. We also have our own internal policy that we don't open an office with only 1 staff person in it for safety reasons. And so if one person calls out sick, or if they go out on, family medical leave, or they're out on, just general leave, we don't open that office. So what we've also tried to do is, the best way to serve Vermonters is not for us to sit in an office and wait for them to walk through the door. And that was really a change coming out of the pandemic. And so the amount of people who go to physical locations to seek services really changed through the pandemic, and now that we're on the backside of the pandemic. And so the volume of people walking through our door did not return to pre-pandemic levels. And so what Jay's team tries to do now is identify when can we have open office hours? So when can they walk in the door? When do they need an appointment? So we can plan ahead to have somebody there to meet with them. But also, how do we take our team and put them out on the street? So how are they meeting people where they're at, whether it's going to a local library or tabling out front of a shopping center, or attending some other event where there are folks of individuals that traverse there on a more frequent basis than coming into our office. Part of that, again, is a numbers game. So again, the more people we enroll in our program, the more funding we get from the federal government, which means we can staff more people. But we are at like record low enrollment right now. So our funding levels are incredibly low. I think when we think about the future of the workforce division and our field services, I think we have to be less focused on physical locations, like how many physical locations do we operate, and more about how do we get more of our staff out into the field, assisting individuals looking to enroll in these services who may either not know that those services exist or can't get to one of our regional offices. But it has become harder and harder to operate those on a consistent basis, open all the time, and still get out into the communities and try to engage people in the community. Jay, I don't know if you want to add anything just to the staffing piece.
We have made some strategic shifts to staff positions in what we call central office in Hillier. They're not always stationed there. They work out of Burlington office or wherever they happen to live. That helps us administer the federal programs in compliance with federal regulations. And it also allows that, we call them program administrators, to support staff in the field, learning how that program works, how we enroll people in it, who it's supposed to serve. So I think we've taken one person out of each regional office and stationed them in a central role. That impacts staffing, obviously, in the offices.
A lot of that too is I was just gonna say, a lot of that is driven through our need, by going through, compliance reviews from the federal government and them identifying areas where we have gaps in how we administer and the ways we administer our programs in compliance, with the federal requirements.
And then, the other kind of supplemental strategy that I would add to what Commissioner's saying is we work with partners and communities and we station ourselves in their offices, in their spaces. Also in retail, like grocery stores where people are coming all the time, just to make people aware of our services. So that's another strategy that we're employing that brings people out of the office, but it results in a greater connection with community partners and results in rated services and funding. I think the other thing that happens out there, employers are saying, we need workers, and they look to us to assist. Great, we're a great resource for that. And there are other organizations around the state that pop up to do a service that's similar to ours. And that may end up taking customers away from the government service that we offer for a service offered by a community organization that's trying to fill a need that they see. And so there are only so many people, right, in the state that we can work with. And when we start chopping the pie up, everyone gets a little piece, and it pulls away from kind of our core mission to be able to serve the public, since we're driven by service members.
Jay, is a little bit outside of DOL, people that are doing similar work, are they receiving any state funds from other areas to do that same work?
Not that I'm aware of. There might be a couple. There's a couple that have received congressionally directed spending earmarks. And those grants come from the Employment and Training Administration at the federal level. We sometimes are asked for a letter of support, sometimes not. And Congress is allocating those funds to a specific project where one of our members of our congressional delegation has just determined that that would be a valuable project in that community. So it's, since the earmarks have started, these projects pop up, and we're trying to find ways to work with those projects to everyone's benefit. But those are some of the tensions that exist in our space.
I will say two things. One is, there's much more utilization now of virtual services, and there's nothing that, our ability to say, this is how many field staff we have across the state, right? So again, if we can tap into the virtual piece, it doesn't really matter if your caseworker is in your community or not, from a service perspective, right? Obviously, being able to work with a local individual, it may be more beneficial in terms of ties to the community and engaging with employers in that area. But the ability to just get general services or enrolled in one of our federal programs shouldn't hinge on whether an office can be open or not. But I also would say that one of our priorities, I think over the next year or two, is going to be service delivery, both from a customer service perspective, but like, where are we spending a bulk of our money, and is that money in the best service to the individual? And so really thinking about how do we provide better customer service? We're doing an assessment of like all the technology, the public facing technology in our service centers. And we'll probably do an upgrade of that so that people can get better service when coming into our service centers. But then also, how do we make sure that the programmatic dollars that we have are being best spent on delivering the best service to the individual. The challenges we get into are, I'll tell you, like White River Junction, Middlebury, Morrisville, those and a couple others that are, again, there's 1 or 2 or 3 people working out of an office. Even in our Barry office, I think at times there's only 4 or 5 people. Right. So if that really can be disruptive in terms of how an office can stay open. We also are dealing with, I think, a lot of physical location issues as well.
This, the kind of duplicating services type things that we continue to see, I think as an area for the executive director of workforce strategy and development, that, we identify that there's a place for even our congressional delegation to have conversations with when they're considering earmarks for something,
Yes.
for another organization. I think is it something that's really needed that we're having a hard time providing as a state? Those types of questions. And I think that's where this, that the executive director can be very helpful in working with you and working with Jay.
Yeah.
And working with everyone else that's in that, in the workforce field. John?
This is a brief question. You mentioned the registered apprenticeship program that the federal government and you work with to sort of certify. Do we see much leakage out of the state from people who've completed those programs?
I may look to Jay. Jay, prior to being director, was the state's registered apprenticeship director. So, Jay, do you have a way to quantify that?
I don't have a view on. But basically, I think your question is about talent and brain drain from the federal government's perspective. They see the system as it's a giant tapestry, and if a person starts training in Vermont and they finish training somewhere else, then great, the system did what it's supposed to do. But our state perspective is, we keep people here.
I think anecdotally, most of the registered apprenticeship program participants are in trades. So they are not typical individuals that would move to another state, like in mass droves, and they're engaged with a local employer, right? So they're to be a registered apprenticeship, you have to be employed with an employer. So this isn't an educational program where you're not attached to employment, you are attached to employment. So they are working for the construction companies, the electrical companies, the plumbing and heating companies.
Sure. And so that naturally tends to.
So yeah, again, that's anecdotal. No numbers behind it, but like from my perspective, we don't hear about from employers that we work with that they're seeing a massive amount of people who complete their apprenticeship program and then they all jump ship to go somewhere else. Most of those are lifelong participants. We met with an employer over this past year, Alliance, that does HVAC and heating and cooling work, and they have a significant their pipeline for talent is their registered apprenticeship program. The people who come into that program stay, and they stay for a long time, and they've done that year over year. Jay, did you want to add?
I just would add, the registered apprenticeship program does allow companies that are based in Vermont to bid on projects that the federal government is funding out of state. And it allows our companies to bring their apprentices to a state like New York or New Jersey, where it's a heavy union presence. They require anyone on a work site to be a registered apprentice. So we can send workers to those projects and have them learn while they're out of state and come back with skills from those projects.
You know, I think we've always taken the look that anything that we're doing here, we're investing in the person, not in the job. And that those certifications and the trainings that they're getting are transferable nationwide as much as possible. To give that person, you know, the best education that they can get. The secondary is let's keep them here as much as we can too. But I think that, you know, the first focus is in, you know, the investment in the individual.
Thank you.
Emily?
Just a quick question. How do businesses find their way into being apprentice spaces?
So we have a small employer business team that is engaging with employers across the state, our regional managers. So what you don't see on that map is that we have 5 regions, pretty common, you know, Northwest, Northeast, Central, Southwest, Southeast. And so they all have a manager in each of those regions that is engaging with businesses as well as our business services team. I think, Jay, you can talk to how do they engage with us around the apprenticeship program. But they do work directly with our apprenticeship team to identify the occupation that they're trying to build skill for. And then we will work with them on developing the curriculum and making sure the curriculum gets certified, as well as, you know, they have to have instructors. They have to be able to demonstrate that there's also like on the job time as well. So there's a number of instructional hours they have to have on top of working in the field. Yeah. You can highlight.
So yes, to what Commissioner said, and we have lots of partners who are interested in registered apprenticeship that we've given training to. So Hireability has a program for placing people with disabilities in work placements, including apprenticeships. So they're able to, when they interact with a business, talk about apprenticeship. Several of the regional development corporations are able to talk about apprenticeship to their business community and make the referral to us. It's at the end of the day, it's a business's own training program that they are standardizing and registering with us as meeting the standards so that then they can train the people in it's at least a year. Some of them are like electricians and plumbers take 4 years. So that's one way, is making sure partners understand how the program works. The second way is that electricians and plumbers have history of using registered apprenticeship, so that's the bulk of our program. And then the third way is we apply for federal grants to work on specific projects. So 2 years ago, we got a grant to work on creating a registered apprenticeship for teachers. We work with the Agency of Education on that. This year, we got another federal grant that's working on training construction workers and building out apprenticeship for construction so that we can build houses and meet the needs of the state. So there are multiple levels to it.
We also work with some employers are big enough that they can have their own apprenticeship program. Others are not. And so we do work with like an intermediary, like an association. So like Ski Vermont helps run our apprenticeship program for tramway service technicians, right? And if you can imagine, there probably aren't many of those in the state. And so they are constantly trying to figure out the next generation of those service technicians. And so we work with with Ski Vermont. They receive some funding from us to help operate that program. But what they will do is they've developed the curriculum and they have the instructors, and then the ski areas together will send the employees they want to get trained or upskilled in those areas to these training programs. So there isn't one ski area that has enough enrollment that would necessitate them having their own apprenticeship program on site. So we'll work with a third party. We're also doing that with like VMEC, Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center. And we've had a couple others where we've used kind of the third party to bring enough people around the table. And like plumbing and electrical, same thing. So that's a partnership we have with Vermont State Colleges to operate that program. So they offer the program, used to be Vermont Tech. And the enrollment and instruction comes through them, but the employer like Benoit Electric may have 3 apprentices and that they go through those classes, but do work for Benoit and do their on-the-job training through Benoit.
That's really grown.
Yeah.
This year or two. What do you see as the reason why that we're seeing that growth in plumbing and electrical apprenticeship?
I think coming out of the pandemic, the young people are making different decisions about their post-secondary options. While at the same time, the colleges have changed and transformed. So I think apprenticeship right now is in a sweet spot where people want to be able to make money and have the company pay their training while they're making money on the job. So there's sort of a sweet spot. I think we want to be able to lean into it more and have apprenticeships in other sectors. But we have to be able to manage that work. And as Commissioner Harrington is saying, finding an intermediary who can go speak the language of that industry and get buy-in has been really valuable to have Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center be able to do that. They do that talk, and then companies come to us and we work on registering their programs. Similar thing in education. And now that we have a commercial carpenter program going, the organization that's sponsoring that one, Associated Builders and Contractors, is able to work with their members and build out other programs in other occupations like bricklayer, roofer, residential carpenter. So there's some other efforts going around to build out a training center for that industry.
I was going to say it's because the department's done such a great job of promoting.
I thought that's why we're here.
Yeah. Jay, though, just because I think it can sound sometimes that like the only place for an apprentice is in the trades and construction trades, using that term broadly. Could you just share a couple of the, maybe not so well-known programs that are in, kind of cross occupations?
You saw some articles recently from 7 Days. There were 2 around Thanksgiving. One was highlighting a wastewater treatment operator and water systems specialists at the municipal level. So the Vermont Rural Water Association is the sponsor of this program. They work with municipalities to train municipal water system operators, which a lot of those operators are retiring. We need that workforce, especially if we're going to grow housing. Another one is early childhood educators, which is done through a partnership with the Department for Children and Families and the Child Development Division. We have their
LNAs.
LNAs, sorry, I'm talking about the partnerships too.
Yeah,
but,
sorry.
Licensed nursing assistants, the educator apprenticeship in the Northeast Kingdom as a pilot.
Yeah.
So, and then there's some like buildings and general services use apprenticeship to train electricians and plumbers. Like the state government uses apprenticeship to train workers. We could probably use it more, but there's 1,000 occupations that people could be apprentices. And that the federal government defines what can be learned through apprenticeship, but it's from the trades all the way to human services to IT and healthcare. If it's a sector in Vermont's economy, we could have apprenticeship in it.
How is CTE part of this? conversation.
That's CTE.
In a former life, Jay was also the CTE director for the state, so.
So, we are working on building out youth apprenticeships. So I'm going to talk about one specific example of an innovation, we'll call it, that we're working on to ease the transition from participating in a CTE program into registered apprenticeship. So students in construction programs, depending on where they are, may get some electrical, they may get some plumbing instruction. Some centers are able to offer full-time programs in plumbing or electrical. So we've negotiated with Vermont State University in Randolph to be able to have those teachers be able to teach the college's electrical and plumbing level 1 curriculum. So when a student graduates high school and finishes their technical program, they will have completed the first year. In a way, it's like dual or concurrent enrollment programs that lead to college. But this is a way of helping high school students get advanced standing in programs. There's already a formal relationship with an employer. We're able to have employers recognize work experiences and give students credit for the on-the-job hours component and the related instruction component, so they get a leg up. So that's one innovation that we're happy to talk about. We could have other places within the technical centers, if we had culinary programs with employers doing apprenticeships in culinary, we could have students in the culinary programs matriculate into apprenticeships. That would be an area of future growth, especially for the hospitality program.
Just getting back to the trades and apprenticeships, one thing that I feel like is not really given a lot of attention is succession. So it's pretty clear that the state of Vermont has some of the oldest populations in the country. And I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen close down, not because they're unprofitable, but because they're just getting too old.
Yeah.
What is there out there to bring some of these apprentices, some of the brighter ones perhaps, that would like to go beyond just being a plumber and running a plumbing business? What sort of support services are there available, and what can we do for people like that?
There's two parts to my answer. The first part is if a student is participating in a technical education program, part of that curriculum is about business ownership and how to be an entrepreneur. Those students who go on to finish the apprenticeship program are more likely to hang their own shingle out and start their own business or take over. Sometimes we see like the father owns the business and the son has been the apprentice, or the daughter has been the apprentice, and then they will take over. So that's part of the answer. That's certainly not everybody, because there's maybe 300 or 400 students that fit that CTE bill. The other part of my answer, I don't know that we have a good system. I'm just, just to put it out there, someone has to be interested in being their own boss, wanting to take the associated risks with that. And I think a lot of people might not be into that. Maybe the other factor is that the average age of apprentices in Vermont is 26. The average age of a male apprentice is 26. Female apprentices are 29. So what that suggests is people graduate high school, they take some time, maybe they tried college, didn't work, something in their life got in the way, whatever it was, and they come back as a little bit more mature, ready to make a commitment for, in many cases, 4 years to learn a job. And I don't know that people in that age bracket are thinking, oh, I want to own my own business. So we could have a better connection with the Small Business Development Center to make that information available to students, practices.
And I think some of there's a need, I think, to bring that thought to the business owner as well. you need to really start thinking about a succession plan. And I think there's some training that needs to be done there. And then, if they can identify and have discussions with some of their crew, it could be an ESOP, an employee-owned business turned into an employee-owned business. And that happens from time to time too. So I think there has to be more thought on the business end of it too, business owner end. Emily?
I guess actually on this topic, it reminds me of the conversation that we had previously with BSEC. Is there any relationship with BSEC in their kind of developing apprentice programs and that sort of thing?
If they're counseling someone, they would be aware of apprenticeships, and there's Advanced Vermont, which has also a resource for people who are looking for apprenticeship. We have information on our website. The other connection with VSEC that we have outside of apprenticeship is with the trades scholarship program. Once someone applies and they're given a grant through that program, at the end of a month, I get a list from VSEC of the people who received or who applied for funding from that program because they're unemployed. And I refer them out to our regional managers in their appropriate region to do outreach and say, we're here, we have other funds. If you want to come in, we can assist. So outside of apprenticeship.
I think,
Keep moving.
there's a lot more questions.
Yeah.
There's a lot more discussions we can have, but we're starting a deep dive and
Yeah.
I think we want just a kind of a higher level.
Yep.
What's going on in the department, and then we'll bring back different people like Jay and others for their discussion.
So let me just hit through some of these other areas real quick. Unemployment insurance, I think you're all relatively familiar with that and we can jump into this if we need to, but at a very high level, it's a predominantly federally funded and federally regulated program. It's been a program that's been around for decades. And there's two sides to the coin, mainly in UI. So employers pay a tax on each employee they have. And that money that is collected through that tax goes into the unemployment insurance trust fund. And the only use for that fund is paying benefits out when somebody loses their job through no fault of their own. And so the first side is the tax side. That's what funds the trust fund. The second side of that coin are the benefits that go out to displaced workers who are paid out of the trust fund. There's a whole lot more to that we can jump into. But for instance, if Representative Cooper has 5 employees, there's what's called the taxable wage base. And so somewhere around $15,000. And so he pays an unemployment insurance tax on the first $15,000 that each of those employees earn. And if they earn that in the first 2 quarters, then he doesn't pay taxes on their wage, on those employers or their wages after that. So there's roughly pre-pandemic, there was over $500 million in the trust fund. We were one of the few states that was lucky enough to not have to borrow money from the federal government, but there are times when states will borrow money to fund their trust fund to pay benefits. The backside of that is they have to pay back the federal government, and there are strings attached, if you can imagine. And our current fund is somewhere between 250 and 300,000. I think we're at like I can tell you in a second.
300 million?
3, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, not sorry. Trust fund balance 3 as of January 11th, 307 million. And so, again, that's a pretty healthy trust fund for the size of our state, but we're certainly not back to where we were pre-pandemic. And then someone applies for benefits. They have to be eligible under the the federal and state program requirements. I think that's the hardest part, to be honest, because they're that no fault of their own will catch a lot of people, and a lot of the you being, I'll use the general you as the legislature, are very good at funneling individuals to us who are struggling with the system. And the difficult part is that not everybody is eligible for unemployment insurance benefits just because they're unemployed. And so they do have to meet the program criteria. We then calculate their wages that they have earned, and their wages are what make them eligible for benefits. So part of our employer side of the house is that employers have to file quarterly wage and contribution reports with us. So we know who is employed by them and what they earned in the last quarter, because it's those wages that not only make them eligible, but then we use those wages to calculate what their benefit amount is going to be. Our maximum benefit amount is over $700 a week now. And I don't remember what the recent average is. It's probably in the $400 a week area, because again, not everybody either made enough. There are a lot of people who are part-time employees that are not earning a full-time wage. We do have a part-time unemployment program for certain people who become displaced. But again, so we typically have anywhere from, we'll take the pandemic out of it, 3,000 to 6,000 people collecting benefits at any time. 3,000 is more like the summer season. The 6,000 is more during the winter months, because we're at an all-time low for unemployment and people collecting unemployment. There's currently around 4,000 people collecting benefits. And the reason for that is the seasonal layoffs. So when the construction season winds down, those people are eligible to collect benefits. The other nuance to the program, just so you know, when our jobs reports come out, the number of unemployed people in Vermont is different than the number of people collecting benefits. So it's not one-to-one. The number as of the last report that went out, see if I can find it here. There were as of November 2024, 8,478 people who are unemployed in the state. And again, that's just a snapshot in time. Doesn't talk about how long they were unemployed for. It's also a statistical calculation. So we didn't go around and count all 8,478. So that's a household survey that's done by the U.S. Census Bureau. And that information then makes its way to our labor information team, or our economic and labor information group. And then that's how they get to that number. So like I said, as of January 11th, there were only, let's look here, and maybe I can match it up too. So as of November 16th, there were only 2,266 people collecting unemployment. Currently, we're now into that was pre-close of the construction season. Now we're in the dead of winter. There's 4,604 people. For comparison's sake, there were, we just did every year, as you probably know, you all get your 1099s, right? So additional income you receive. So we just processed 1099s, tax documents for the people who collected benefits in 2024. It's roughly like 12,500 people. Pre-pandemic, and like in 2019, it was 16,000. In 2020, 98,000 people collected unemployment benefits. And that put an immense strain on our system, and we are still that system is still wreaking havoc on our program today. As one person described it back then when we were working on the system, what we're doing to the system to make it work for the pandemic is like taking the genie out of the bottle, and you're not going to be able to get the genie back in the bottle. The system's never going to operate the same way it did, given the age of the system. It was a system that went live in June of 1970. The code was updated in the 80s, so it's it's still COBOL code. The system now resides offsite on newer technology, but it still uses the same code. And those who may have any understanding of how coding works is, you have to not only know the code, but you have to know how it was constructed, right? So you have to be an expert in COBOL. You need to be an expert in how it was constructed back in the 80s, right? Because all of it is interweaved together. And you have to be an expert in how unemployment insurance has to operate to meet the federal requirements. And so we are currently going through a modernization effort. Our go live is scheduled for sometime in the spring/summer of 2026. So we are moving fast and feverishly towards that go live date. It can't come soon enough for both the public, but also our staff. Our staff are the ones who struggle with this system day in and day out. They're the ones who are answering the phones with the claimant that's been waiting on hold or can't get through to the system or can't file their benefits. I will say that before I move on in the slideshow, the biggest issues we have right now are the number of people who call our call center, and that increases the wait time. Part of the reason is because the automated functionality that existed pre-pandemic was one of those pieces that could not be reattached post-pandemic. And so when we take a claim over the phone, when we open a new claim, a process that used to take 7 minutes now takes 27 minutes, right? So we have more call takers than we did pre-pandemic now. We have fewer unemployed people than we did pre-pandemic, but we are spending, 3 or 4 times the amount of time on the call with the claimant to open that claim because of how manual our system has become. The other issue is, you'll hear this a lot, the term adjudication. Adjudication is like fact finding. So you did your application, something on that application said this requires more review, and that claim goes in. It doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong, but roughly 50% of all of our claims go into adjudications for additional fact finding. And that's because there are things like if somebody claimed that they got paid out leave at the time of their separation, right? So leave that needs to go through additional fact finding because we have to validate what was reported by the claimant and what the employer said. And both of those interested parties are afforded due process as part of the unemployment system. And because they got paid out leave, that's offsetting remuneration or offsetting income. And so that goes into factoring what they will get paid for benefits. And so that is the other challenge we have is a lot of people, our system doesn't easily talk with claimants. So once your claim goes into adjudications, it's not like the claimant can log into this system and see where their claim is in the process. So we get a lot of calls about, hey, I filed for benefits back in December. It's now January 23rd, and I still haven't heard anything, right? And so that's one of the biggest struggles we have is making sure our claims move through adjudications fast enough. It is a hard position to fill. We don't have a lot of them, and they take a lot of time to train up because they have to be administered in accordance with federal law. And so they are hearing a case and they are issuing a determination based on the facts they have in front of them about whether somebody is eligible, and if so, how much they eligible for. Once they receive, a claimant can receive a determination. If they don't like what that determination says, they can appeal that to the Employment Security Board. And if they don't like what comes out of the Employment Security Board, they can appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. And we do have those appeals happen on a regular basis. there may be questions, I think, around unemployment, so I'm happy to pause there for a second.
So say I'm a little concerned with people that wind up in adjudication that the people that most likely, but we don't know, have lost their job through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
That have no other income coming in.
Yeah.
And it's taking, 60 to 90 days.
Yeah.
Figure out where that process is going. And, I don't know, I mean, what can we do? What more can we do to try to remedy that till the new system is online? And then, the appeals process, from what I understand from the state auditor, it's 10 to 12 weeks and it's supposed to be 30 days.
Mhm.
And so we have all these people sitting in limbo with no income coming in.
Yeah.
And hopefully they're able to find another job in the meantime.
Yeah.
But if they can't, and they've got kids and, we could have people losing their homes and being foreclosed on and losing their apartments, whatever, but that's what really is troubling me a lot.
We are, I think, we're fully staffed for the first time, consistently fully staffed for the first time. I think we're going to look to add another adjudicator, hopefully, to that list. The biggest challenge for us has been turnover, and that across state government. And I have some number, for instance, if you look back to even early 2024, we had vacancy rates like in UI and workforce development. Our highest vacancy rate in 2024 was 26.9%. Most of our vacancies come through the call center and through adjudications. We're currently at, we're roughly around 15%. I think we're closer to 12% in unemployment insurance. So we've made some significant gains there, but you're also, again, there aren't a lot of people looking for jobs out there. And so what you are finding are the people who are hard to employ and hard to retain. But again, I think to your point, that is my biggest concern as well, is the amount of time it takes for somebody to move through adjudications without income. We're a little bit hamstrung in the sense that we only have so many staff who can do that work. We have tried to add staff, both, even filling the seats we have. But that process takes long. It takes, probably anywhere from 3 to 6 months to hire people and move them through the state hiring process. And then many times what we're doing is having to post positions multiple times because we are not finding qualified candidates for those jobs. And then we see a lot of turnover in those frontline. They're high stress jobs, right? You're dealing with people who on their worst day. And so there is a lot of turnover in those areas.
Is there anything else that we can do to provide benefits to someone even if they're going into adjudication? Or are we stuck because of federal regulation?
Yeah, from a legal perspective, luckily, I also have our former general counsel here, Dirk Anderson. And so Dirk may be able to share from a legal perspective. The risk there is if you overpay benefits to somebody, if you pay someone improperly, you then have to claw those benefits back. And so if we issue benefits before we've made a determination and then we deem them to be ineligible, we then have to go after them to get that money back. And I don't know if that's a better or worse situation to be in. But, from the federal perspective, there are federal requirements that preclude us from paying benefits until a determination is issued.
That is correct, Commissioner. Dirk Anderson, for the record. Federal law requires us both to adjudicate if an issue is discovered we have to adjudicate that issue prior to paying the benefit, and if we pay a benefit improperly, the federal regs require us to then try and claw it back, like the commissioner said, and that can be just as stressful. So, you know, from my perspective, you know, this was an issue during the pandemic when there was, you know, just a desire to pay everybody, right? But that result, you know, we're still dealing with the fallout from all of the federal unemployment programs that were stood up that the U.S. Department of Labor is now telling us we have to go get that money back if we made improper payments.
One thing we do that doesn't solve the wage issue, but when our UI staff hears from a claimant, I can't afford groceries, I can't afford heat. If there's other benefit programs available in state government, we do refer them over to those. Like DCF, the Office of Economic Opportunity, for example, can help you pay, you know, for SNAP benefits for food, light heat, and OEO has heating benefits. So if we're aware, if they bring up other issues where there are other programs that can help pull them over in that instance, again, it doesn't solve the underlying wage issue. We do try to work across the enterprise to make those connections.
For the record.
I'm sorry, Kendall Smith, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Labor.
He did.
He did.
Okay.
And then I just wanted to get, is there a way that we can be proactive in that? And that when somebody applies for unemployment insurance, that we can refer them to these other agencies?
Well, if they go,
At the
in, you know, if
beginning?
it goes into adjudication, maybe that should be automatic, but.
Yeah.
You're, you know, this is gonna,
I can see if we do already, there is a packet of information that gets mailed to every claimant. And so, one, it wouldn't be hard to add something in there about additional support services. And then there may actually be stuff that we're communicating out. I think we were during the pandemic. I just have to track to see whether we can do that for adjudications.
I just want to make a quick point on that is that we also need to think about how easy it is for people to administer and get to these programs
Yeah.
if they have the bandwidth to do that.
Yeah.
If there's an easier way that we can deliver those services to them in a streamlined manner.
Yeah, so this is a good example of some of the challenges we face. We all knew fraud and identity theft became a big thing during the pandemic. Our biggest way to combat fraud was to actually require claimants, once the peak of the pandemic settled, to actually require claimants to call in to open their claim. Because during the pandemic, we put the initial claims application online. And what we saw is that 90% of the claims that were filed were fraudulent claims, 10% were real. Soon as we took that application offline and made them call in, 90% of our claims were real and 10% were fraud. And so we are working with our technical team to say, is there a technology way, a technological way we can put that application back online, back into the hands of claimants, but also protect it. But I will also tell you that technology, the other biggest challenge we have is that the people who, a majority of the people who access our system are not technologically savvy. And so they do struggle with the amount of people who come through our program. You have to have an email address. Yeah. I can tell you that a majority of the people who access our program have never created an email address. And so the idea of then being able to use that email intuitively to access benefits and access the system and receive messages and remember what the password is, like that is one of the biggest barriers. And that is, again, mainly because we've for so long have not advanced the UI core system to a modern day system. So, until the pandemic, we didn't even collect email addresses in our system because the mainframe was never designed with the thought of email addresses when it was built. And so, even just collecting email addresses now gives us a way to communicate with claimants that we didn't have before. But it is a access. We did, and some of you may have heard this last year, we did receive a multi-million-dollar equity grant that our team has been deploying over the past year and a half on ways to ensure equity and access to the UI system, both current and future. So that's everything from having our materials translated into 15 different languages to we had a company do a full assessment of the access points into our system and how to make them more accessible for individuals. So again, that is some work that we're really proud of. Obviously, some of it pertains to the way the new system is developed and not the old system. But we're happy to share more on that if you want to know more.
Certainly want to do a deeper dive in where we are with the new system. And certainly more on UI and.
The number, my understanding is our appeals numbers are better than what is reported at the auditor, because when that audit was done, it was, I think, a year or two old. So we are in a different space there, and we are below the 60 days. Our goal is to be, below 30 days on the adjudications piece. But I don't think that will happen until we actually get a good working system. Or we staff up.
Is there, are we running our own call center, or
We are back to running our own call center.
is there ways of providing more bodies to take more calls? And I mean, if we're spending, instead of 7 minutes, 27 minutes, and we're, people are call wait times have to be expanded exponentially. So is there a way, and because I'm a little concerned with an $8 million reversion, and here we have big issue with UI claimants, and can we utilize some of those dollars that we want to revert to try to at least help people right now?
The biggest challenge, and some of you may remember that when it takes, and this is a change post-pandemic to pre-pandemic, but it takes probably a month or two for somebody to get to a place where they're really comfortable taking a claim. And that is somebody who is highly skilled and kind of that high productive employee coming in the door. So it can't happen overnight. It does take time, especially if you're talking like adjudicating claims. It's a lot different if you're just taking a claim over the phone. And so, the challenge for us has been both positions and I'll say funding, knowing that we didn't spend all the funding, but we also we were having trouble filling the positions we have, let alone adding more positions. And I think that's been our challenge from the beginning is we're going to add a couple more positions, I think, in this next year, with the hope of, even during turnover, we're maintaining a critical level of call takers and adjudicators. But turnover in the past year has been our biggest challenge. And then system outages too. Every time the system goes down, we get a flood of calls, and then it doesn't matter how many people you have taking calls when you've got, 5-hour wait times and 400 people on the line. That's a challenge. And again, it could be because the system is down and we literally can't do anything about why they're calling. Or we're back, the system was offline and it crashed on a Monday. And so Tuesday now is, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday have kind of been thrown out the window. So those are the challenges at hand. We can certainly talk more about, what it would take from a staffing perspective to advance that. But I'll say this, recognizing again that I said that this is the worst day for a lot of people when they have to call for unemployment, and they deserve to have benefits in their hand as quickly as possible. The only silver lining right now for us in the country is that there are more jobs available than there are people unemployed. And there will come a time where there are fewer jobs available than there are people unemployed. And so the ability to be reemployed is much higher now than it has been during the past recession or will be whenever the next downturn comes.
So in that packet, are you providing either a link or,
We can look at what's in the packet, and
the job
Yes.
link and for job search and assistance?
they get some workforce development materials. I think Jay's team gets an idea of who the claimants are, so they can do direct outreach to them. And they also, I'll share these around, but one of the joint partnerships we have is with the McClure Foundation, and every 2 years they publish the most promising jobs. And so there is information here that.
I'll get those in the mail too.
Yes.
Can I shift gears here for a minute? Are there any categories of employers and then the employee that goes with it?
Yep.
That are exempt or receive any kind of waiver from the unemployment insurance process? I'm thinking specifically of household employees where you're trying to keep an elderly, infirm parent in the home, so you hire home health care or have a disabled child. And if the cost of doing that business, if you will, can't be met within the household income, well, then it goes on to some other part of the state into the healthcare system or something like that. So is there any kind of...
There are exemptions for people who do not, occupations and for people who do not qualify for unemployment benefits, but anybody that qualifies for unemployment benefits has to go through the same process. So they all have to be treated the same, and that is a federal standard. So there's not an exemption from the unemployment process. But again, at the end of the day, it all comes back to, is that individual considered an employee under the state's law? And is that employer paying into the trust fund? Because they have to pay into the unemployment benefit trust fund in order for that person to, not in order for them to be eligible. There are times when someone is miscategorized, they still end up being eligible. But then that employer is then required to pay back the trust fund.
Just to clarify for me, my question isn't based on denying it a legitimate employee, something is the affordability issue for the family that is now a household employer and has to go through the same process. And
and again, if they fall under the definition of an employer and an employee relationship, then they have to follow that process. And there are, I'll give you an example. Someone I know hired a house cleaner and someone to come in and clean their home. If that individual is not set up as their own corporation or LLC, they may not be considered an independent contractor, and you, as the person who's having them come in and clean your home, may be considered under the definition an employer and have to pay unemployment insurance for that individual. Again, if you are, we find that, we find misclassification under UI and workers' comp quite often, where someone identifies somebody and believes, classifies them as an independent contractor, but under the definition, that person is truly an employee and entitled to the rights and protections of being an employee. And so the employer is liable under those circumstances.
Thank you.
Yep. Just to hit on a couple of things. Next up is Matt's division, labor market information. That's all right. And we don't need to go into great detail. I'm sure you will have Matt in at some time to talk about economics and Vermont's labor force. And then the following slide is Dirk's division. We spoke about a little bit earlier. Again, most of these are either special funded or like VOSHA and WorkSafe are a state 50-50 match. So roughly 50% of their funding comes from the state and 50% comes from the federal government.
Can we just, the language that's in BAA concerning DigSafe, just touch on that? I
Yeah, so
think it's pretty,
Dirk may not be aware, but there is a section in there about, and you know it better than I do, specific to DigSafe and permitting process and the ability for permitting to or construction to move forward provisionally before DigSafe has done their assessment. I'm not aware of where that falls under us because we don't oversee DigSafe, but again, maybe from your perspective on a safety.
I really am not,
who is doing DigSafe? I thought it went through you.
it does not.
I listen as deputy commissioner, but if I put on my former job hat here for a second, I believe that language is emanating from the Public Service Department, which is now Commissioner Carrick. If you would like to get more information about it from him. And I believe there was some language in a bill, I don't remember, last year that did some housekeeping, and this was an oversight, and it was just to clean that up, but you should.
It's not my department, so.
Yeah.
I know we talked about it in here before, but that was prior to us. When we used to have utilities and stuff, so that answers that question. Thank you.
Many of you, just on the VOSHA piece, this is another area where you may become heavily involved from constituents. We will go in and inspect workplaces for safety. Our team does inspect major injuries or fatalities on work sites. They also receive direct complaints from employees who are concerned about their safety, and we will go in and do inspections. There's always contention between an inspection and a citation and the cost of that citation, and the fact that sometimes that citation and the fine attached to it is much higher than what it costs to fix. And I always say that, the fine is not based on what it costs to fix the problem. The fine is based on the risk and the cost of the injury that could have or did occur because of the unsafe business practice. The outlet cover is the one I hear often, right? Like someone may have received a fine for many thousands of dollars because they did not cap an electrical connection or an outlet and put employees at risk based on whatever practice or work they were having the employee do. And, it's a $3 fix, right? But it might be a multi-$1,000 fine. We try to work with the employer. There are ways that we will reduce the penalty or fine depending on the severity. Has it happened before? Are they willing to invest in training and other things for their employees? But we are also capped at our, there is a matrix we use to assess the penalty, and we can only reduce it so far from there. But again, the penalty is meant to match the risk and potential injury that could have occurred, not what it costs to fix it, right? And the piece with the outlet cover is, it may have been a $4 fix and you probably should have fixed it when you had the chance. And so we can talk more about that, but that is some areas where it does make its way up to the legislators because you might get an employer or an employee, either side, who's worried about an unsafe business practice or has to deal with the department. And then
that also has a direct correlation between worker comp rates and safety. So I think in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we really focused on safety, promoting safety in the workplace, which has actually dropped our worker comp rates down and kept them low. So it works. It's a good thing for us to do, and also it's good for us to make sure that VOSHA stays that it's Vermont regulated and not regulated by the Fed. So we do everything we can to make sure that we're the regulator, not the federal government.
Yeah, and the biggest thing there is, and the reason it wouldn't be good if it went to the feds is the feds don't negotiate. And so they they will come in based on a claim, or so you might have less regulation because they may not be out there doing as many investigations or inspections. And that's not necessarily good, right? Employers may see that as a benefit, but it also puts more employees at risk. It also has impacts on workers' comp rates. But the other side is when they do come in and they do an investigation, they also don't work with the employer to figure out what's best for this. We try to meet a balance there between the state and the employer and what's best for the employees in that case.
Just in order of succession, does OSHA supersede OSHA? Does it work coincide?
So it is a federally regulated program, so they follow the federal statute of what is required at a minimum, right? So in many cases, the federal requirement, because most of our programs have some federal nexus, the federal requirement is the minimum. You can't be less restrictive than the federal government, but in ways you can be more restrictive than the federal government. So, as a state, we could be more. We can't be more liberal in the sense that we're waiving a federal requirement for a business. But if we wanted to have a stronger threshold than the federal government, we could impose that. The place where you might see it the most is think of like PFOA contamination levels, right? There's the federal minimum standard, and Vermont has a much higher minimum standard for contaminants in the water. And that is, again, because we have chosen as a state to prioritize clean water.
So for an employee or an employer that wants to appeal, they would appeal to OSHA, but would they have the opportunity to appeal to OSHA, and would that matter?
No, they wouldn't appeal to OSHA. I'll pass it to Dirk and you can walk through that process.
Okay, so if I could back up to what I.
We also don't have to go super deep into it. I just.
So as I understand the question, it sounds like you're asking if there's some sort of concurrent or overlapping jurisdiction between Vermont OSHA and federal OSHA.
Yes.
And there is not. So as a state plan, Vermont has assumed enforcement responsibility for both private sector and public sector employment. So if OSHA goes in and cites somebody and the employer believes it's unfair or it's too much, there's an internal process for appealing that. We have an informal conference. If the employer doesn't like the result of the informal conference, they can appeal to the OSHA Review Board, which is a state review board. It's a board set up under the governor's office.
It's outside of the department, so we don't have anything to do with the board.
So an employer can appeal that outside of the department to the OSHA Review Board. But the federal government doesn't get involved in terms of mediating the outcome of a OSHA fine. Because we, through our state plan, have jurisdiction over both public sector and private sector. The only thing Vermont OSHA does not have jurisdiction over is federal employment. So for instance, unfortunately, I'm sure you all heard a Border Patrol agent shot and killed a couple of days ago. We would not investigate that because that is federal employment and federal OSHA would have jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Sure.
All major incidents resulting in major health or fatality are required to be reported to the department within a certain amount of time. So we do, and then that is typically what we'll launch. Often we get a call from local law enforcement or state law enforcement before they ever submit the report. But it's that incident or the report launches an investigation. Next up, because we're near the end, is the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development. So I don't know if you want to spend a couple of minutes on that today. We've got Sabina here just as an introduction, but
I think it might be good to save that until we bring up the bill.
okay.
gonna be speaking with the chair, our counterpart in the Senate at lunch, to see which one of us is gonna start that conversation. We did have a walkthrough yesterday.
Yeah.
So I think we can have that discussion with Sabina then. Your assistance as well when we're working on that bill, if there's anything else we see in there that. I do wanna have that, I gotta remember to talk with Rick about moving. What is it? Now moving the one of the statutes out of.
Oh,
out of
yeah.
One of the books into the other ones. I think.
Yeah, so one, yeah.
I gotta see what Ledge Council wants to do with that, and might be the right time to do too.
Maybe just as if we could back up one, and not to speak for Sabina, but just as a heads up for this group. We have identified a chair for the board. So as part of the new legislation, it kind of dissolved the board and recreated the board in a much smaller size-wise number of seats on the board. So we have identified a new chair. It's Jay Bellows from Core Power. And then we're hoping to have the board appointed, I think, in the next couple of weeks. So again, within a week or two, we should be able to announce who those other members are of the board.
And then at what point would we appoint the executive committee of the board?
So the executive committee, some of it is defined in statute. So about half of it is, and then the chair needs to select 2 workforce partners that are on the board and 2 businesses that are on the board. So the key with the board is a lot of it is authorized under WIOA. So the reason the board exists, although it serves a dual purpose of both WIOA compliance, but also our state focus on workforce strategy. But the key there is the board is 50%, more than 50%, 51% is business owners or operators. This is just a reference. I don't need to go through it. The next slide. Just again, these are who our constituents are and why they would come to you probably. Again, just this kind of, it's not an exhaustive list. It's the most I could think of. But it's pretty broad ranging, but these are who we represent or who engage with us. And again, everything from unemployment to workplace safety, worker rights, wage complaints, grants and information, employment services, dispute resolution. So again, that's just a tool for you. Next slide. This just shares with you who our points of contact are. Again, for me and for Kendall, you're always welcome to reach out to us, and we're happy to assist. But we do have Rowan, who's our legislative liaison, so you're welcome to reach out to her as well. And Roger Van Tassel is our executive assistant, and you can connect with him. This kind of talks about, depending on what you're asking about, may help direct who best to contact to get either information or resolution. I will say this, and there are claims, for lack of a better term, that because most of your issues will probably be around unemployment insurance claimants who are struggling. There are claims that get stuck, for some reason, someone had hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, and it prevented their claim from going through. That's not the majority of the cases, but there are those that happen. And so I always encourage you to bring those to us, and we will address those immediately. The thing we can't do from an equity standpoint is like bump people in the line, right? And so again, if they got thrown off course by something we did or they didn't get the right information, we will make it right and we will take care of it immediately. But again, again, the hardest thing is, people are struggling. But we constantly say, for a fairness perspective, we review claims in the order in which they're received, right? So we do not bump people, but we will review a claim to make sure it's on the right track, make sure there's no, it didn't get thrown into adjudications because it didn't need to. Occasionally that happens. And we try to clear those, but sometimes it's not readily apparent. So again, when there are those kind of extenuating circumstances, we're happy to assist and step in. And I think that's it. The next slide is simply just, you'll find us online everywhere from Instagram to X/Twitter to Facebook and YouTube. And if you're not following us, we do post everything from press releases to outage notices, right? If a system is down, to where our last job fair was and how many people attended. So again, you are one of our core groups of people we engage with in the legislature, and just encourage you to follow us for more information. And Jay?
Newsletters.
Yes.
We have a weekly jobs newsletter that compiles jobs from across the state. If I'm gonna automatically add members of the committee to that, so you can see through Constant Contact. And then we have a quarterly newsletter that started in the fall called Employer Edge, that is highlighting business practices that align with the good jobs principles. When I come back, I can talk about that. And we're also starting a quarterly apprenticeship newsletter. So we have 3 communications.
There's
people.
also a department newsletter that will
There's a
start this
department
year. So
newsletter, so we're
raise your hand now if you don't want to get the newsletter. You are welcome to opt out if you don't want to be flooded. But I think you'll find that a lot of the information is not redundant, and it's about, one, you'll find it beneficial. It may help keep your constituents informed as well. And we can always add people to those lists. The jobs newsletter that goes to every person filing for unemployment over the past month, I think, or longer. So, and then it goes to a bunch of others, groups of individuals. But again, we try to make sure this information is getting in front of those who need it most.
One thing to make this more interactive is if you all have a business in your district that's doing something just amazing, let us know about it, because there might be an opportunity in one of these communications to spotlight them and give them some credit. So that's, if there was a give and take there, so you're not just reading things from us. If you have a constituent business, an employee that's just killing it, doing something so great, you might be able to spotlight them, so let us know.
Good to know. Commissioner, thank you. Thank you to everyone. We'll certainly start breaking things down. We always do a UI. We need to understand where the trust fund is at, what things are going there. That's a
That report should be out in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Week or two.
Once it comes out, then I'll have you back and have Matt in as well.
Yeah.
And Dirk can talk more about worker comp and.
Yeah.
And we're talking about workforce.
Yeah, and we won't be, at least as it stands right now, because in the past, we used to have to come before this group and others every time we wanted to set the worker comp rate. We fixed that. And so we don't anticipate at this point needing to change the worker comp rate.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Committee, we're back here at 1 o'clock. So have a good lunch.